Hi, I'm Mark Picco. I'm the Technical Communications Coordinator in the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science. My role in our faculty is to help students with their writing and other types of communication. As far as I know, I'm the only person who has this type of role in our university. I could be wrong. It'd be nice to meet other people who have that kind of role. So if you do have that kind of role, just reach out to me after you're done listening to the presentation. Today, we'll be looking at AI and how AI can be used to enhance student writing. And we'll be looking at these three topics. We'll be looking at just an overview of what technology and AI is. I have to separate the two because not all technology is AI. And then we'll be looking at two methods of using AI to help students with their writing. Firstly, we can use AI to help them explore a topic, to plan and to learn about the to do preliminary work on what they're going to be writing about. And then we can use it to analyze their writing, something you might do after the fact, or even sometimes during the process of writing. So first, looking at technology and AI, the first thing that comes to mind is ethics. And this is something you'll hear on social media all the time. This is a quote from a news report. Pretending it's yours is acceptable if it's the same thing you wanted to say. This was by Jennifer, and she's a student. And if I asked you what Jennifer is talking about here, I think most people today would probably guess that she's talking about AI. However, she isn't, because this is from 2004. This is from before AI became an issue for classrooms. In fact, this was about Google. So she was referring to what you find in a Google search. And at that time, in 2004, educators were very worried about how Google would impact students' ability to write ethically, to do things ethically without plagiarizing, without any of that sort of ethical or unethical conduct. There's also the idea of paper mills mentioned in this report, where students potentially will go online and buy papers from other students. They will have someone write papers for them. It also talks about how cell phones might be used to cheat on a test or a piece of writing. And it even talks about how a Walmart heiress was living with another student on campus at a university, and she paid her roommate to write the papers for her courses. And that student actually dropped out of school to basically write the papers for the Walmart heiress full time. So as you can see, there are many, many ways in which things like technology, or even in some cases, other people can be used to cheat. So AI is a new-ish kind of worry. As every new technology creates a potential for misconduct, AI does as well. When we talk about AI, there's many branches of these kinds of technologies, and we're right now in basically the first layer of the onion. We're looking at artificial intelligence, whereby we are trying to use software to um, help humans do tasks, to do things in an automated fashion. That's pretty much where we are right now. As of right now, in order to make these processes better, what has to happen is that there are very low paid people in various places of the world who look at our prompts, who look at the outputs, and they try to help fine tune those to try to increase the capabilities of programs like ChatGPT. When that kind of layer does not exist anymore, when we remove humans from the equation, then we're getting into things like machine learning. So many people would argue that we're not quite there yet, but it probably will come eventually. So when we talk about AI, we often think of ChatGPT because it is the most common tool. In fact, the two have become almost synonymous online, even though AI is much broader than just ChatGPT. ChatGPT is just one program that exists. It's a large language model. That means that it's trying to produce language. The G in ChatGPT stands for generative, which means that it can generate content. And here we're talking about writing, but it really could be anything from producing images to making music. There are many different types of tools that are generative. The P stands for pre-trained, which means that there's a static data set being used. For the case of ChatGPT 3.5, it's using data that existed from 2021 and before. Anything more recent wouldn't be in its data set. It also uses mostly, I'm going to say mostly, um, information that is freely available online. So a lot of its information comes from sources like Wikipedia. It does not, however, know the entire contents of the internet. A lot of people think that it does, but it absolutely does not. The T stands for transformer because it uses sequential data to make links and inform its output. It's not a tool that is like a repository of facts. That's not what it is. It's something that makes links between data. In some ways, it's kind of similar to the way our brain works and our neurons link data, pieces of information to one another. Large language models are driven by prompts. So we feed into the language model a prompt and it will say something back to us. So for example, if I asked it what is a computer monitor, it would have a response to give us. And if you asked me what a computer monitor was, my response would look something like this. A computer monitor, blah, 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 blah. And you can probably use your own reasoning to guess what those words are that are in those blanks, even though you don't know how I would define a computer monitor. Personally, when I went to define it, I defined it as an electronic device that displays information from a computer, which seems like a completely normal definition of what a computer monitor is. In fact, it's so normal that when I asked ChatGPT the same thing, its answer was very similar in many ways. It said a computer monitor, and then it has also referred to as a display or screen. I don't have that. But if we look at the next part, is an output device that visually presents information from a computer. So you can see that is an is the same, and device is the same, and that is the same, and information from a computer is the same. So there are a few minor changes, but it is mostly the same thing. And the way that these kinds of programs work, and this is absolutely not exactly how they work. I'm just using a simplified explanation of them, but they're kind of like predictive text is on a cell phone in that it's guessing according to what it knows, its statistics, what words are going to come next, what words are linked to each other. So much like when I said that displays information from a computer, once it got to the word presents, it knew the next thing was going to be information from a computer. So their goal as LLMs is to produce human-like language, and we interact with them all the time. Things like this when we're talking to businesses online. We might talk to chatbots that seem like they're humans, some better than others. So that's what their goal is, to kind of act like a human in an interaction. But they also have not goals that they often get used for. So one of their not main goals is writing papers. So even though students might have used them in the past and continue today to use them to write papers for them, that's not actually a goal of an LLM. It's also not a Google substitute. It's not meant to find or verify facts. Like I said, it doesn't really know anything, and it knows associations between things. So it gives you good guesses, and it's often correct. But in many cases, it's not correct either. That comes to our next point, which is that they hallucinate. Although they might be grammatically accurate, and I've very rarely seen any kind of grammatical error in any of the LLM outputs, they're not always factually accurate. For ChatGPT 3, that translates to roughly 15 to 20% of the time, the information that it's saying is fabricated, it's made up, it's not real. ChatGPT 4 has 40% less than ChatGPT 3, but that would still mean that it's 9 to 12%. And there was a paper that came out just earlier in the week where it talked about citations and how likely these programs are to create fake citations, to create fake sources for information. And ChatGPT 3.5 did it 55% of the time. So more than half of the citations it created were not real. ChatGPT 4 didn't do it as often. It still did it 18% of the time. And it wasn't very good at producing documents when it did produce documents because The length was very small. The number of citations for, I think, ChatGPT 3.5, the minimum one was 2. So even though they're asking for citations, they're only getting 2 citations. I think the maximum was only 5 for ChatGPT 3.5. So in terms of creating information, it often fabricates information, and it's not overly well suited at tasks like academic writing. Another example of how it might fabricate information is this real estate listing that I had to create for 240 Prince Philip Drive. So it describes things like uh, generous living spaces and a gourmet kitchen and an elegant dining area. And this sounds like a beautiful place to live. I'd like to live in a place like this. However, it's actually right here where I am right now in the engineering building. I have not seen a gourmet kitchen here. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I haven't been able to find it. It's definitely not a residential house. So even though it sounded confident when it described this location, it actually had no idea what the location was. And sadly, that is the way it works with ChatGPT and every other tool like this, is that they're prone to hallucination. So like I said, the sources are often non-existent or fake, just like here, where I asked it to get some books about um, automated underwater vehicles, and it found a bunch of books, but these aren't real books. I've looked up the authors, and in most cases, the authors are actually real people, but these are not books that they've written on this topic. So how much can we trust things when it just makes them up all the time? It's so certain that it even starts prompt response with certainly, but it's not actually true. It really struggles with details as well. So when I told you about writing those documents earlier, in that data set, they tried to get 2,000 word documents, and not a single document produced by ChatGPT 3.5 exceeded 1,400 words. So they can't get anything with any kind of length. And if we're looking at the average length, I believe it was somewhere around 800 or 900. I can't remember exactly, but you're probably not asking as an instructor for an 800 or 900 word paper for your course. That's has to do with that limited word length. Also, it can't be cited in many cases. So citation styles like IEEE, they don't allow the citation of these kinds of sources because they're not recoverable. You can't give someone the citation and have them find the exact same information. What you would do there is you'd acknowledge the source. You'd say that it came from ChatGPT, but it wouldn't get a formal citation of any sort. When you're looking at academic journals, several of them have said specifically that they don't allow chatbots to be authors. They don't want any kind of AI generated content to form part of the documents that are submitted to them. Other journals are more accepting of it, so it really does vary by journal. In terms of ethics, as I mentioned before, these employ a very low paid group of people who are just looking at prompt after prompt after prompt, output after output. They also have some issues environmentally where it uses a lot of water to cool the computers because it requires a lot of processing power to run these programs. However, if we look at the tools themselves and we just disregard how they came to be, they can be used ethically. So students are able to use these ethically. Though some tools that exist, some AI tools, are inherently unethical. One example is Jenny.ai. It's very similar to ChatGPT in that it can create a document. So you'll ask it to write something and it'll write it for you. The problem is that it doesn't have sources for that information. Just like most ChatGPT alternatives and ChatGPT itself don't provide sources by default, you have to ask for them. This program, however, gives you the option to highlight any sentence or even an idea and to cite it. The problem is that that citation isn't actually where this information came from. And in some cases, it might not even be an idea found in the document. So it's kind of a way to make student writing, um, seem legitimate, seem like it was research when it actually wasn't. Many AI tools as well, they flout copyright when they're trying to train the software. So what they do there is they have a data set, and like I told you, some of the information comes from Wikipedia, but some of the information also comes from places that are probably more private or copyrighted, at least. So right now there are numerous lawsuits being faced by these companies. Sarah Silverman is currently suing them because it says that uh, it used her writing to train the models. J.K. Rowling a while ago had problems with it because you were able to ask it line by line about the contents of her books and was able to produce it line by line, meaning that it must have been trained on her books, even though her books are copyrighted. The same kind of thing exists in AI art. So here we have Calvin and Hobbes. I asked it to draw a picture of Calvin and Hobbes by a stream, and it did a pretty good job. Now, if you're looking at the details of the image, well, clearly there are several lines coming down from the fishing rod. Calvin, I think, has been confused with Hobbes in terms of his face, but it does have the style pretty spot on. It even knows that in many of the images in Calvin and Hobbes, they only use a small number of colors rather than coloring everything. So, it's not a great image, but it is a representation of Calvin and Hobbes, and it likely used copyrighted images to be able to generate this kind of image. Now, I also had to create a picture of Taylor Swift burning concert tickets, and it's much better at that. And another problem that people have is some people have argued that some pictures that they have taken have been used to train it as well, especially some of these companies that um, make their business from taking images of celebrities at gala events and things like that. So a good rule of thumb is to not ask AI to do anything you wouldn't ask a human to do. So that would be a good thing to tell students. If you wouldn't feel comfortable asking a human to do that, then don't ask an AI to do it. So if you wanted to compare, would you ask, as a student, would you ask a human to proofread a paper? Would you ask another student to read it and see if there are any problems with it? And I think most people would agree that's probably fine to read it and say, does it make sense? However, you wouldn't ask another student to write a paper for you. So why would you ask an AI to do it? So that would be my own personal standpoint. I think that really, if you don't feel comfortable asking a human to do it, if you think that it might be unethical for a human to do it, then it's probably unethical for AI to do the same thing. So now we're going to look at some uses of AI for student writing. So when you have students in your courses and they're wondering how they can use AI, these are the best ways that I can think of for using it. The first one is exploring a topic. So ChatGPT is probably the most common one. It's okay when you're trying to make an overview of a topic. When you don't know anything about it, if you already know about it, it's not going to give you a lot of crazy information that you've never heard of before. It's going to be mostly the stuff that you already know, and it's going to be very general. But it will describe a topic in plain English. It might say some things you hadn't thought of as a student. That might be what would happen there. So you could tell students that they can use it to, for example, ask the benefits and disadvantages of using unmanned aerial vehicles in polar environments. So you can have a bunch of benefits, a bunch of disadvantages. That might be a good way to start the student project. Help them think about some things related to benefits or disadvantages. That's great. It's not going to write anything for them in this sense. But there are other programs that I think are far more useful if you're trying to have students write something that is going to be academic. So one of those things would be Elicit. So Elicit is a tool whereby you ask a question, and what it will do is it'll summarize the findings of the articles that it's found that answer that question. And it also gives you sources and links to those sources. And it even goes as far as summarizing the abstracts, often in just a simple sentence. So here's an example. I asked Elicit, what are the challenges of using UAVs in polar environments? You can see on the left, it has a summary of the top 4 papers. And then in the middle there, you can see the actual papers that it used and links to the DOI or the PDF. You can see the third one doesn't have links to either one of those things, so I don't know how you'd access that one. You might have to look that one up in something like Mun's OneSearch. Now on the right-hand side, you can see the abstract summary. You can see the third one, for example, is summarized in probably fewer than 10 words. So that's really good for someone who just wants to know what it's about, but doesn't even want to read the abstract. And from this, the students can actually read these articles. So it basically helps them filter, because if you're an instructor and you're telling students how to do research, you're often telling them to read the abstract and then decide if they want to read it. In this case here, that would be even less than reading the abstract. It's only reading a summary sentence. And you can even filter it as well. On top, you can see it says has PDF. So you can make it so that only articles that exist in PDF form are available. And there's a lot of them that are going to have PDFs available. Another similar tool is Consensus. The website for the last one, I think, is a .org. I think it's illicit.org. And this one here is consensus.app, I believe, .app. And this one here, you ask it a yes or no question, and it has to be a yes or no question. I think you can do it without it being that, but it works a lot better if it's a yes or no question. And what it'll do is it'll summarize the answer, and it will give you a consensus graph saying what people have thought if they say yes or no to this question. And it even finds sentences from the article that answer the question. So here we have the same question. Can UAVs be used in polar environments? You can see a summary there from the top 6 papers analyzed. That's kind of similar to what the other one did. But there's also a consensus meter. You see that it's not listed there. There's no graph. But if you ask a very common question or a more common question, it will present it in a bar graph form. It will have yes, no, and unsure. So you'll see what people think in terms of the literature. And then you can see here's an example of a sentence that came from this article and that basically answers the question that you asked. So it's good for students to use when students are trying to start something like a literature review or start research for a project. I really like Illicit and I really like Consensus for this purpose. Another thing that can be done is outline creation, and I'm just basically going to use ChatGPT for this, but I have seen other tools that are good. I just can't think of them right now. But I have seen other tools that can do something similar in terms of creating an outline. ChatGPT is not going to create a good paper for anybody because it's just not going to be able to use sources. It's going to be limited in length. But it's pretty good at suggesting outlines for papers. So if students are having trouble getting started, they don't know what should go in their report, you could ask ChatGPT to perhaps write an outline. This is an example of the outline that I had it write for this kind of a paper. So you can see it has an introduction, it has several sections, has a spot at the end for references, which is really just a placeholder, but it has a properly written outline. And this is something that a student can modify to suit their own needs. They can take away parts or add parts as they want. So this seems like a good use of AI because it's completely ethical. The student is not submitting something that an AI wrote and saying that they wrote it. All they're doing is they're basically asking ChatGPT, if you were going to write this, what kinds of things would you put in it? And I'd say if I were asking a student in my class, I'm going to write a paper about this. What would you put in a paper about this? I think that's fine. So to me, this is more of an ethical use of AI than actually having ChatGPT write a paper for a student. Now, another usage of this is analyzing the writing. And this is something that you do basically after you're finished writing, though it can take place during the process as well. A lot of my background is in language teaching, so this is a point that really hits home for me. So we're going to look at 5 different types of analyzers. They're mostly AI based. I'm looking at them and trying to see if there's any that isn't. I think one of them is more of a technology than AI, but 4 of them are definitely based on AI. So the first one is Grammarly, which is a tool that both the engineering and applied sciences faculty and the School of Graduate Studies provide to its students. No one else does in this university. But there is a free option that exists as well. So it's something that they could potentially use. It uses AI to provide suggestions for replacements and revisions. And it can be either web-based, and we're just going to look at the web-based version, or it could be integrated into your apps. So I, for example, have it integrated into my Outlook, into my Microsoft Word. I actually have it integrated into my OS as well. So there's a lot of different ways to use Grammarly. So you can use it while you're writing. You can write something within Grammarly's environment, or you can use it to edit or proofread after the fact. For me, one of the things that I would advise people to do is go into the customize section of Grammarly. So when you go to your account, go to customize, and that allows you to really tailor what kind of suggestions you're given. For example, by default, every kind of suggestion is on, but I always turn off the use of passive, which is a common feature of academic writing. So when people are saying, instead of saying, I tested the subjects on, you say the subjects were tested on, and that would be an example of using passive. So that's something that you might do. You might want to turn that off so that it just doesn't tell you all the time that you're using passive. There are numerous other settings there too, like fluency assistance for people who speak English as an additional language. A lot of great features there. But how it looks is on the website, you'll see there's a place for your documents. You upload them into there, and then it will highlight them on the spot. It will say what kinds of errors you have, whether they're correctness errors, clarity errors, engagement errors, those kinds of things. And it will let you fix them right in there as well. So you can edit and you can fix them right inside Grammarly. I personally don't use it this way. I use it in Microsoft Word because I'm producing my documents in Microsoft Word and it saves me a step. When you're using Grammarly, it also gives you the ability to set your goals. So it uses AI to determine if how you sound matches the goals that you want. So is the audience, for me, I always pick knowledgeable or expert, one of those two. For a level of formality, I pick the most formal. For domain, I pick academic, and it will use AI to determine if your writing sounds like that. And it'll make suggestions on how to make your writing sound like that if it doesn't currently. It also gives you a report like this, tells you how many characters and words you've used, how many sentences there are, and the average sentence length, which is very important. I'm really big on trying to use metrics to determine if the writing is good. It doesn't always give the full picture, but you know, if you have an average sentence length of 40 words per sentence, your writing is not going to be understandable to most people who are reading it. So it's a good idea to try to keep that sentence length down. It doesn't have to be really low either, because then it sounds like a children's book. But according to Flesh's Reading Ease, if your average sentence length is between 17 and 21, you're probably at the sweet spot in terms of being formal, yet also easy to read. If you have an average sentence length that's above 21, then it's getting into more than fairly difficult. In terms of the free versus paid option for Grammarly, you can see that on the left. These are the features that you get. Things like grammar correctness, grammar correction and conciseness. You get those kinds of suggestions. It will detect your tone, whether you're speaking in a friendly way or a neutral way, that kind of thing. It does have the auto citation option, but I don't use that personally. I use other tools for citations, which are not in this workshop, unfortunately, this webinar. It also would give you generative AI if you have it turned on. If you have this as an individual, it would be by default on. I manage it for our faculty and I have it turned off because I don't want the students to have Grammarly writing things for the students. It'll give you 100 prompts in the paid version. I believe it's 1,000. You get a lot more features in the paid version, so there is a difference there. The paid version will also give you something like plagiarism detection, which, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, is not very good. An alternative is PaperRater. There is a paid version of this, but I think the free version is suitable for most people because it has almost all the features anybody would want. It looks like this. You put in your document, you set your education level. What it will do there is just it'll compare your writing with your peers, people who have that same self-reported education level. And the type of paper you're submitting as well, you put that in there. And you can do a plagiarism detection. I usually have it skipped, but you can use it if you want. It's, again, not going to be very good, but it does exist. And it does the same kind of thing as Grammarly does. So it highlights the words and it will give you a little report that will show, for example, the grammatical errors that were made. And it goes a little bit farther than that. It looks at, for example, the transitional phrases that were used, how you started your sentences, so how complex your sentences were to begin. So these little, I guess these metrics are nice to know. It gives you a percentage. It doesn't mean a lot, but it compares you against other people that are in the same peer level, I guess you would say. Another thing that can be used is word counter. Word counter is only good for analyzing. It's not going to provide you with any kind of grammatical checks. Anything that you see there underlined is actually Grammarly. I have Grammarly on my computer as well, so that's always running. One of the things that it does do, though, it tells you how long the average sentence was. Like I showed you, Grammarly does that as well, but it doesn't do that in Microsoft Word. One of the things I like to use this one for is the keyword density. So what that means is it shows you how often you've used words. So for a student who's overusing a phrase, they can click on this. If they click on ×2, they'll look at 2-word phrases, and they'll see perhaps they've used, for example, 10 times in the span of 6 paragraphs. So it might be a good indication that the student wants to use a synonym. So it's a good way to help them self-edit when they're writing. This one here I don't think really is AI, though. I don't think there's anything about this that's AI. This, however, is definitely AI. It's Poe. I can't remember if this is a .com or a .org. It's one of those two, I believe. What this is it helps you create a bot yourself. So what you do is you write in a bot name and you give a description, and you get to choose what bot it's based on. So you can use ChatGPT, you can use Claude. It does have access to a couple other ones as well, I believe, that I'm not familiar with. I don't know what Dragonfly is, for example. But it does have access to those. And what you do is you put in basically a scenario that comes before you give it the piece of writing that you're giving it. Now, I'm going to show you what I mean. There's something called prompt engineering where you're trying to improve the prompts. And most of the prompts that people put into ChatGPT are zero-shot prompts, where they're just asking basic questions. So you can improve how ChatGPT responds to you. And this is basically true of any large language model that's popular today, by changing the prompt. So you can see there, for example, there's a one-shot prompt where you give an example, or a few-shot where you give a few examples. But the one that's most useful in many cases is role prompting, at least for this kind of a thing. So here it says you are a business person hoping to start a new NHL franchise. Where would you locate it? So then the person is trying to decide where they want to put the ChatGPT there is deciding where they want to put it if they were a business person. So it's the same kind of thing that happens here. It says you are a writing teacher who's familiar with the conventions of technical writing. Your job is to analyze pieces of writing to make them suitable for publishing in an academic journal. So what would happen here is before you put in your prompt, it's already pre-prompted with that idea. So I've done that, and then I put in a piece of writing actually that ChatGPT produced, and it gave it some kind of a feedback as a technical writing coach. Is it going to be amazing quality? No, but it does exist. You can see that there actually are some useful comments here. For example, it wanted to avoid phrases like negative impact and instead use more neutral language like adverse effects. So it's a neat little tool if somebody wants to get maybe some extra feedback on their writing. It does exist, and I personally like it. I don't use it overly, but I think it is nice. Lastly, there's Writfull. It's, in terms of ethics, one of my favorite tools. However, you can see that it's not perfect. For example, what it does is it looks at your errors, and I put that in air quotes there, and it gives you the percentage likelihood that what you said is wrong, or what's the percentage likelihood that another option is correct. For example, I changed it to say impurities from the steam chambers, and it changed it to chamber, or it wants to change it to chamber, and it says that there's a 98% likelihood that the correct one to use is chamber, and it's right. It knows that that one's right. However, the other one above it says come with a come with a base station for heating. They want to change it to come to a base station for heating, which doesn't make any sense. So the with is correct there. So it's not always correct, but I have used it. It has a lot of great features. For example, it gives you some phrases that you can use as a student. It gives students phrases they can use to insert in the writing to make it sound more native-like, essentially. Some very commonly used phrases by native speakers if they happen to be those who speak English as an additional language. It gives you suggestions for your titles for your documents. A paraphrasing tool exists here. So there's a lot of nice features here. The paraphrasing tool is limited to just a few characters or a few sentences. You can't do it with a full document. It's only for basically a sentence at a time. So it's really cool for that. There's another feature that it has that I really love. It has a AI-based citation suggester. So what it would do there is it looks at each sentence and you put in a threshold. The default is 80%. And if it's determined that your sentence has a more than 80% chance of needing a citation, it tells you that there's a citation missing. That one there is not available unless you have it as an institution. So no matter what you do, you can't really get that. I had the pleasure of trying it out myself. I really did like it. I wish that everyone had it. And this is a situation where I think that AI could be really well used to help students improve their writing. You have to remember, though, that there are privacy and confidentiality problems. So there are different privacy terms depending on the tool. ChatGPT, Grammarly, PaperRater. I've read through their terms and conditions. I wouldn't say that either of them are overly positive in terms of privacy for the user. Whereas Writfull is very positive. Everything that I read about that one seems like they're not going to take your data at all. It basically doesn't take your data. All of the information is done not stored on their computers. Whereas with ChatGPT, for example, things that you write into that go to them, can be used for their training. And I just personally wouldn't input anything that's personal or private in any one of these tools, honestly. But if it's not personal and it's not private and you don't mind getting help with the writing, you could tell students that they could put it into these tools. I'm going to talk about plagiarism detection now, only briefly and only because it's related to something that's coming next. So plagiarism detection, there are no great options, whether they're free or paid. So as instructors, we want to see if our students are plagiarizing. There are some basic options that do exist for free. We'll just quickly run through those. Grammarly is not actually free because you have to have a paid version, but if you're a graduate student, or if you can talk to graduate studies, or if you're an engineering prof, then you could potentially have access to it as well. And here I've found that 100% of this document that I put into it was plagiarized, which is great. It found that the exact same thing existed somewhere else. But as soon as you change anything, this article here, this little bit that I wrote, is also very heavily plagiarized, but it only found 77% match to source. Other standalone plagiarism detectors like QText, this one found that 9% of it was similar, found the same sentence from Wikipedia. This one here, Plagium, found no plagiarism at all. And that's surprising because all of those yellow parts are either exact or near exact copying from somewhere else on the internet. Some of them are from journal articles, some of them are websites. Some of them grammatically don't even make sense because they're titles of articles. So that is how much is copied. But all of those tools didn't find anything, because basically, if something is changed even a little bit, it can have severe impacts on if a plagiarism detector is able to find it. Even if I put the same document next to a tool like Count Words Free to try to find if things are the same, I don't know if you can see it there very easily, but there is one part where it says newer on the left and it says modern on the right, and it said that the ER was the same. Well, it's not the same. That ER is different. It's not even part of the same word. And it says that in common, they have about 13.59% things in common. So say 14%. However, when I try to do it myself, when I actually take the parts I know are plagiarized and I copy them, if I look at the copy, I can see that it's actually 33% directly duplicated with no changes at all. So a human is typically better at finding plagiarism when you're comparing it against the original. It's a really important step, because regardless of what a plagiarism tool says, if it says it's 20% or 30% or 50% or 5%, if you want to accuse a student of plagiarism, you have to be sure that it's more than just a percentage. You're saying it's plagiarism. You have to actually look at the original and try to compare it against the student's work to see if they're the same. Just going by a percentage doesn't really mean a lot, because when you consider things like chemical compounds, there are large strings of chemical compounds, or if there's a block quotation, or maybe two of those or three of those in a text, it can really throw off that percentage. And plagiarism detection companies, they call themselves similarity detection companies, they really focus on this percentage because they think instructors, professors really like to use that. Whereas anybody who looks at academic integrity really doesn't care about the percentage. It's really about comparing the two things and the intent. A lot of students tend to use text spitting software. I don't know if this is something you're familiar with, but text spitting software, you put in the sentences and it will give you a paraphrase of those sentences. And it has numerous problems. Personally, on a sentence level, if it's just one sentence, I don't have a problem with that in terms of plagiarism. They're just not very good. Because if you look at the original sentence and my paraphrase, mine is 76% original. Whereas the one that the Quillbot, which is the name of it is Quillbot, it's the biggest tool for that purpose. That originality is 25%. It's not very good at all. Potentially still considered plagiarism, especially if there's no citation with it. It also has even larger problems in terms of meaning. So if we look at these two, yeah, they're 80% similar, but despite being 80% similar, that changed verb that the arrow is pointing to, exceeded, makes a huge difference in meaning. So challenging the expectations versus exceeding expectations are very different meanings. Exceeded meaning it's way better than what the students had thought it would be. Challenged expectations means it's just different than what they thought it would be. So those two meanings are different. You have to be really careful as a student if they're using Quillbot, because what could happen is the meaning of the new sentence might be different. So AI detection, that's why we're getting to this, is because it's even less trustworthy than plagiarism detection. There's loads of different examples out there. There's OpenAI has a tool, CopyLeaks has a tool, GPT-0, and there's also Zero GPT. Turnitin has actually gone back on their tool. Turnitin had an AI detection tool as well, and they've had to remove it in many situations because of it being wrong. Unlike plagiarism, there's not an option to review, because with plagiarism, you see the original source, you see where it came from. In the sample we had earlier, it came from Wikipedia. However, with AI detection, it doesn't tell you what AI tool it came from. It doesn't tell you where these words came from, which ones are copied exactly. It just can guess that it's plagiarized, or not plagiarized, but it's taken from AI or it's not taken from AI. So in that case, what would be your recourse if you took a student to some kind of a panel? If the student is trying to defend against the idea that they took their writing from ChatGPT, how can it be proven that they did? You're just basically going by the word of another AI tool in many cases. They also tend to identify English as an additional language writers as AI generated, 61% of the time, even when they're not. So that was a study from Stanford, came out about a month ago. And it is happening, though. AI is being used to write. Here's an abstract that appeared in an IEEE journal. And if you look at the last two words of the abstract, it says regenerate response, which means that this abstract was put into something like ChatGPT, not ChatGPT exactly, I don't think, but something similar to it. And at the end, there was a button where the person could have regenerated the response, and they accidentally copied that as well as the entire abstract. So this, like I said, has been published. There are numerous publications right now that have in their journals phrases like, as an AI model, I blah, 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 blah. And in some cases, they're about ChatGPT, so they're probably fine. But in other cases, they're not at all related to AI. And it's really scary that these things are allowed to be published. So in summary, the best uses of AI are to use it before a student writes and after a student has finished writing, not as something a student uses to write themselves. If your objective is to assess a student's ability to write and you're having that student use AI to write for them, it's not really assessing their ability to write themselves. And it's pretty scary because when you're using it, students can get output that is completely hallucinated. It could be something that sounds confident, but it's not actually. And the privacy of the students isn't always guaranteed when they're using these tools. The prompts that they're writing, the things that they're putting into the tool, and the stuff that it's putting back out are going back into that to help it get trained further. Um, that's always a worry, and there's other worries that the content would be claimed and the ownership could be claimed by this AI company. And you should also, as instructors, and then you should communicate to your students that AI will sound confident even when what you've asked it to do is incapable. And that as instructors, if you're using detection tools, it doesn't matter if it's AI detection or plagiarism detection. You don't just trust what it says uh, as being the truth. Very recently, a prof at Texas A&M failed his entire class because ChatGPT told him that all the students use ChatGPT to write their papers when in fact they did not. So it's really scary when trying to trust these kinds of tools if you have no other evidence that a student has plagiarized or used AI to create something. I wouldn't just blindly trust what it says. All right, so that is the end of the presentation. Guess I'm going to look at some questions now to see if there are any questions I can answer. Darlene, do I have 10 minutes to answer questions? Is that how long I have left?
Yes, about 12 minutes actually.
All right, let's see what kind of questions are here. What tools provide references as well? Well, if you're looking at AI tools, perplexity.ai would provide, sources for the information, but you're not going to get any kind of academic source from that. It's going to be basically the website that it got the information from. So it does exist. Can't get Bard? No, you can't get Bard because Google has not allowed Bard to be used in Canada. You can probably use a VPN. I don't know, haven't tried it, but that is what I think. What AI did I use to generate the pictures and images? It was Night Cafe. I looked up because I have a bunch of post-its here for everything I'm supposed to try to remember. Yeah, it was Night Cafe that I used to generate both of those. It has one of those models where you can get credits every day just for logging in. Um, you're not going to be able to do it without paying if you want to do a large number of AI generated images, but you definitely will be able to create an image or two here and there. Can you get the handout or PowerPoint presentation? I don't know, Darlene, can they?
It's your PowerPoint presentation. If you want to share it with me, I can
Yeah.
certainly,
Okay. If there's a way to
uh,
send it out, then I will definitely do that.
okay.
Um, what do you think about using ChatGPT with using plugins like Consensus Search plugin? Yeah, I noticed that Consensus has started allowing that. And since I made these slides, that's one change that's happened is that ChatGPT is started to be integrated with Consensus. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I know that it exists. That was a private message, so I guess people can't see that one. Um, okay, so there's a question about when you're submitting something to some kind of plagiarism or AI reviewing software, does it go into their database? Is it going to be shown as plagiarism if it's already been in that database? Well, the first question is, does it go into their database? It depends on the tool. Like I said, I don't think Writfull would do that. I wouldn't trust I don't think, but I'm fairly certain it doesn't. I've talked to them before and they said that they don't download those documents anywhere. They stay on your computer. In fact, when you're using the standalone version of it, it's actually downloaded onto your computer. I don't think at any point it goes to them. Um, However, other things I wouldn't trust that they don't go to them. They definitely do in the case of something like ChatGPT. So they definitely go there. Will it be shown as plagiarism because it's in their internet database? No, I can't imagine it would be shown as plagiarism because it wouldn't be among the list of documents that would exist. So if someone's using something like Authenticate or Turnitin, what's in OpenAI's private database is probably not going to contain that. I do know like what you're talking about though, because if CopyLeaks, for example, when you're using CopyLeaks, when you submit a document to CopyLeaks for checking, for revision checking or whatever, it does store it in the database so that if your instructor is also using CopyLeaks, then they will see it as being plagiarized, but it's actually your document as a student. So it is a worry, but not one that I would think would happen with most programs. It would just happen to be if someone is using the exact same program to edit as they are to um, check for plagiarism. Grad students who are submitting thesis, check for plagiarism, a good tool for that. I'm going to say there's no good tools. They just don't exist. Turnitin is the biggest company, and Turnitin is so big that they buy a lot of their competitors, just basically to get rid of the competition. In fact, I was talking to a company one time, and basically between the time that I set up the meeting with the person and I actually started talking to the person, they got bought by Turnitin. So it happens very, very commonly that Turnitin buys companies. But even that, Turnitin is not perfect. You're not going to say that Turnitin or Authenticate are really great at detecting plagiarism because, as I said there with Quillbot, it's very easy for someone to take phrases and change them in such a way that a program like Turnitin or Authenticate is just not going to find that it's plagiarism. Someone says that they have an ESL grad student who puts their original sentences into ChatGPT and has it correct the grammar for them. Do I find that ethical? So there's a second part of the question. I'll get to that after. But the first part, do I find it ethical? Yes, I do. Assuming that your goal is not to make sure their writing ability is, grammatically, you're not in charge of improving their grammar, then I would find that ethical to do it that way. You can use ChatGPT, but you're using it then for a purpose that is not its intention. There are other tools that exist, other ones that I showed in this presentation that might be better to use, but ChatGPT does sometimes, if you put something into it, it can find if there are grammatical errors. If they contain sensitive information, then ChatGPT might own the information, give it out to other people. That's always a worry with anything that you're entering. So likely would they do it? Probably not, but there is the potential. The whole idea that this kinds of information could be used, could be sold, is the reason why this university doesn't have something like Turnitin on a university-wide basis. Because students, I think Munsu years ago argued that that potentially could happen. Someone wants to know more about Writfull. Writfull is a competitor to something like Grammarly. It is probably more expensive than Grammarly, though I'm not entirely sure. It's AI based, very similar to that. I really like that they give a percentage to say how sure it is that something needs to be changed. It integrates directly into your Microsoft Word. It can also be integrated into Overleaf, and it basically runs alongside that. So in a tab in Microsoft Word, and it's got a variety of purposes. I'm going to open up my Microsoft Word very quickly and just say some things that are in it for Writfull. So Writfull, when I go to that, I have both Grammarly and Writfull installed on my computer. So if I turn Writfull on, it gives me the option to check a document or a paragraph, to revise. It gives me the option. Oh, it has a really good feature where you put in a phrase and it basically tells you what words you should use there based on statistics. Gives you the ability to generate a title, to paraphrase words. So it's got all those things in there. Then it has the option of upgrading to premium, which I don't have currently, which would give you even more options. There's also two different modes. There's a proofread mode and a full edit mode. It's a really good tool. It costs nothing to check out, so I would recommend that you check it out because, again, it's free, but there is an upgraded version that you could get. Someone asked if I have the same concern with Grammarly sharing information as I do with ChatGPT. Personally, yes, I have the same concern, but it's actually for me a very minimal concern. I don't worry about it too much. But I can see if somebody had very sensitive information that they're using that they might be concerned about it. All right. If AI detection programs are no good, what should we do if we're trying to detect the use of AI in student writing? There's really not much of a recourse there. The best thing that you can do, and I actually had a case of this already this semester, is you go to ChatGPT and put in the prompt that you've used for the question and see what the results are. And if the results are very similar, then you could say potentially that it was generated by AI. So I had that happen already this semester once. I looked at the original, the one that the student wrote, and I looked at the ChatGPT version, and it contained the same phrases. That is one way you could know, because there's no way randomly people are going to use the exact same phrases. Just not to that extent. Other than that, using AI detection is not great, so I wouldn't suggest that at all. But I think that is one way you could do it. Additionally, if you're looking at the sources, if they have to cite sources and the sources don't match the original, or the sources are completely fabricated, that's also a good indicator that a student used AI. All right, that's the last question, I think. Oh, no, there's one
Yep.
more. What is your advice to instructors on how plagiarism should be checked as far as the use of AI ChatGPT is concerned? Oh, well, that basically is what I said there. Same kind of answer to that. That's the best way to check it. Just go to ChatGPT and put in similar prompts and see if it matches. Because other than that, you have no recourse. You can't definitively prove that it was written by AI, just like you can't prove that it was written by another student or another person or someone paid to do it. It's very hard to prove that. Plagiarism is actually so much easier because you can find the original source and say that it matches the original source. But with something like contract cheating, where you're paying somebody to write something, or with AI cheating, that kind of thing, it's really hard to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. Is MUN going to make a campus-wide policy? As far as I know, yes, they will. They're discussing it now, but they don't currently have one, I don't think. I know that each faculty right now is basically scrambling to try to make up some kind of guidance for its students. So I know our faculty has some guidance I think that we're going to go with, but it's just there's no way around it. There's one more question. Writing a recursive process, so are you concerned with suggesting students should use tools like ChatGPT for pre-writing or editing? Pre-writing or editing. I personally don't see an issue with using it. I don't have personally an issue with this kind of thing happening, because I feel that it's not like when someone is writing and they're using it Grammarly, it's going to give them suggestion. It doesn't automatically change it for them. So the students have to consider each time, is this a good suggestion in terms of the editing part to that question, at least. Anyway, I guess that's it. If anyone has any additional questions, you can message me at or email me at mpicco@mun.ca.